Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Garg, my esteemed colleagues on the panel, dignitaries gathered here, people who've survived the post-lunch session. And I don't have a deck, so I want to keep it easy for us. I'm summing up some of the things that I've heard since morning, and I will also comment on some of the things that have come out during our discussion here. First, my name is Shuva. I head international cooperation at a Made in India think tank called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. The think tank has been there for 15 years now. This is our 15th anniversary. I joined it 5 years ago. That was 20 years into my career, where I have worked for 15 years in IT, the early days of .com, etc. And since 2014, I've worked in policy. And I want to say that I was born into energy. I was born at the New Jalpaiguri terminal of Indian Oil. So I've been in energy all my life. I also had my first computer in 1984, which shows how old I am. But I just want to make the point that technology and energy are neither new, and they are innovated constantly upon. So what is the technology of today, what is the digital regime of today, we had also in 1984, 94, 2004, 2014, and now in 2024. So that's where I would like to anchor ourselves and return to some first principles, because we have come throughout the day to where high-end solutions are being proposed, and I don't presume to know more than the experts. So I'm going to not touch those topics and stay to my area of expertise, which right now is geopolitics and the interplay of energy geopolitics, technology geopolitics, and what that means for India as we become Viksit Bharat by 2047. So first, Dr. Garg said something very important. He said that clean energy is not fully defined, it's a relative term, and I agree with him. It's cleaner energy than what would be a dirtier source of energy. This is not particularly understood, so we have spent many, hours, decades discussing colors of hydrogen sources, whether LNG is clean, not clean, maybe cleaner than oil, maybe this crude is cleaner than that crude, etc. We have come to a conclusion, I think by now, that we need to focus not just on a transition, but on our energy security. And that links to our economic security, it links to our national security. And there can be no compromise on that, irrespective of the colors, taxonomies, and definitions of terms and technologies. The second point I want to say over here is something Dr. Garg said just now. Computing, even a lot of computing, is not artificial intelligence. I know there is a lot of private equity investment hinging on adoption of this current modern technology, but I can assure you that early technologies also had the same evangelists saying that that was the ultimate technology that existed. And back then, yes, it did. When Indian Oil adopted SAP in the 90s, it was cutting edge technology when it connected all the petrol pumps across India to real-time data. When ONGC adopted its first virtual reality, I think it was the best in the world at that time in the early 2000s. And yet, intelligence of a computing system is limited to, as I think my colleague said, the information that we feed it. And then it computes. And therein comes what Dr. Garg is very specifically saying, that the human intervention in forecasting and foresighting and identifying opportunities and risks come in. So I want to speak on a couple of things today. One is what other areas which come under clean technology can we have the research and implementation of the kind of technologies that the energy sector is using? What can be cross-used? And second, what are the risks that lie with both energy systems as well as digitalization and the technology regime that we are currently in and going towards? Now, first I want to return a little to the macroeconomic point of view of all of this. What is a Viksit Bharat? When we say we want to be a developed society, not even an economy. An economy is easy to define because we have, again, basic definitions linked to GDP, to fleet size, to merchandise trade, to service trade, etc., etc. None of that really encompass the quality of life of people in these countries. This quality of life has never been benchmarked. We just know that a person with a higher per capita income has a better quality of life. It's a broad assumption. We need to understand that as India develops over the next 25 years, what can we expect? Our organization was the one that gave the figures for our net zero target. We had given 4 years as potential scenarios. That was 2050, 60, 70, and 80. We picked 70. It's based on the GCAM model. However, I personally feel that basic linear projection is not the ideal way to define what we would be doing as people in 2047 or 50 or 70. Because when I was there 25 years ago, we did not have pretty much any of the things that I have at my fingertips today. And I don't know if at that point of time we had said that in 2024 we're going to have quantum computing and AI beyond science fiction. So the world that we are going to inhabit 25 years later has maybe not been imagined yet. And we need to keep that in mind when we plan our economic structure, when we plan our industry, we plan our agricultural systems, we plan our power and energy systems, our defense and security systems. And I feel that this audience here, the talent that we have in the energy field, really need to be socialized to other fields which are not as advanced, to make sure that our economy and our people are progressing in tandem with not just the world, but with each other. So I want to give an example of an analog system, which today in the modern era, India has the best of, which is our electronic voting machines. They are not really electronic, they're mostly analog, they are not a digital system. And yet it is something that serves billions and billions and billions of voters over and over and over again. So everything does not need to be the absolute latest cutting edge technology. We must find fit for purpose technology, what serves us best for what we want to do at a given point of time. I want to give a couple of examples also of digital systems that have succeeded where the world has to catch up with India, the UPI being one. 46% of the world's transactions are now done over UPI. Most developed countries have not even started along those lines. If we come to energy systems, and I will give very quickly 3 examples of 3 different types of energy systems, one domestic, one industrial, and one specific to oil and gas, where digitalization has played a fair role. It's not instrumental, but it has been an enabler in the truest sense. One would be the Ujjwala Yojana, by which we had the LPG systems be given to the below poverty line households. The JAM Trinity, which used the Jan Dhan mobile and other Trinity, which used the digital background, was used to deploy the LPG system to rural and poor households seamlessly. And this was a perfect collaboration between an offline infrastructure provided by our oil sector companies, a household network that was collated by the Gram Panchayats and the district collectors, etc., and the overarching payment and registration systems were provided by the JAM system, which is online. A second system that isn't quite digitized is the marine freight system. 94% of India's trade happens by marine freight. And yet, because it's so difficult to make sustainable or green, let alone electrify, we hear very little about it in the mainstream. We keep talking electric vehicles, and as I think Mr. Balian said, in a very ironic phrase, Dr. Balian said, that now we have coal-fired EVs, which is the ultimate, joke if it were. So finally, and if I look at the oil and gas, something that is so basic and taken for granted, which are rigs, are the ultimate leverage that some companies have over the oil producers of the world, oil and gas producers. Venezuela is a huge case where they're sitting on reserves they can't extract. That is not modern technology. That is just technology. So we need to be very cognizant of the power of technology without getting caught up in the hype of the current technology, or the flavor of the day, as we call it. There are some other markets that we are looking at. We've spoken a lot about decarbonizing industry. One of the things that my institution is researching right now are the marginal abatement cost curves. They're called the MAC curves. that measures the emissions, benefits from reducing emissions to how much can be emitted, etc. Now this done for steel, we've done it for steel, aluminum, fertilizers, cement, and we're doing it industry by industry, but now this data has to be socialized, it has to be usable by all entities of that ecosystem, and that is where a knowledge backbone is required to ensure that not just the companies that can afford the data and the technology, but anybody, the MSMEs in the value chain can use that. Because without that, the scope 3 cannot be decarbonized. Only scope 1 and 2 will happen over there. We are also looking at the power markets of the future, which are grids. We spoke in the morning of how interconnected the EU was. We aren't, I don't suspect we will be. We have both geographical and regional challenges. But that doesn't mean that we cannot have grid-based electricity transactions with not just our neighbors, but countries far away from us. There are undersea cables, there are overland cables, all sorts of things will happen. But then we must check what are the risks to our power system when the whole world is connected to a grid. Where are the security points? When we are decentralized or we are offline or we are analog, we do not have the risks of one switch flipping off. So a parallel ecosystem of risk measurement and management of the adverse situations has to come up in parallel to us going online and electrifying ourselves. And that's what I mean by tandem development of technologies. We also have air quality, something we discuss every October with the Parali, etc. But we have still not managed to break through, because the technologies that we're using are just going on monitoring some basic data, but something like an oil company, seismic companies, people are working with huge amounts of emissions. They're constantly measuring. Why can we not have those technologies deployed at scale, at the urban level, to measure something that is, at the end of the day, an emission of some sort? And that sort of big data has to then be collated and fed into other systems that decarbonize a city. Otherwise, we'll have things like odd and even, you drive your car this day, you drive your car that day, etc., which are band-aids at best. I wanted to speak a little bit about our water systems, and I was discussing that with Dr. Sanjay here. And my point to him was that if we are looking at seismic studies under the ground, and he said we can do it for geothermal, maybe we can do it for our water sources as we go deeper and deeper. I know that ONGC at one point of time was also looking for the Saraswati River using its seismic studies. So there are services that can go beyond the immediate sector to related sectors, and these things cannot happen at the ministry level because the ministries are siloed and focused on their specific deliveries. But the tools and the technologies are agnostic to their applications. They have to be innovated, and a very big strength of the West is this cross-application of their innovations and technologies. The NASA's technologies are used for many, many civil purposes. But we do not have that sort of, I wouldn't say imagination, we have it, but we have such restrictive systems that do not allow for this cross-pollination of thought. So I'm told that we'll be here, Dr. Garg told me that we'll be doing a session in July with water, renewables, and this thing. The water people should have been in the room today, because a pipeline at the end of the day is a pipeline. The delivery system of water and gas, utilities as we call them, to households, how different are they? So a CNG system can be studied along with a city water delivery system. We must think like that to maximize the benefits of our innovations. Similarly for food systems, we are looking at many, many types of agroecology. That also involves water, it involves seismic studies, it involves land studies, it involves the physics and chemistry and the weather and so on and so forth. And yet, we very rarely see cross-pollination of research technology across this. And I want to give a final example, which is energy adjacent, which is sustainable cooling. India is set to lose a significant proportion of its GDP in the next 15 years or so from loss of productivity due to heat. And I'm not talking heat waves and people dying, etc. Those are extreme cases. I'm talking of each one of us being unable to perform at our full potential simply because of feeling very hot and very humid. We have developed, over the last 4 years, India's first climate risk atlas. It maps our 768 districts at a 25-kilometer radius, and then goes down to ward level at 5-kilometer radius. We've used the last 50 years data, and I can tell you that this data was all over the place. The Met Department had some, the ISRO had some, the state governments had some, the disaster management agencies, NDM and SDMA had some, etc. We brought all of it together, and we have now seen that of these districts, 75% of our districts are susceptible to extreme, and I'm not saying slight, extreme risks of floods, droughts, and when in the coastal areas, cyclones. We've also seen that most of these, 44% of these districts have something called swapping trends. So where there used to be droughts, sometime along the last 50 years, now there are floods and vice versa. Many of these districts have floods and droughts consecutively within months. This is important because this leads to planning our infrastructure, our energy, our water, our utility delivery systems. Because if we do not account for this layering, and which is why the seismic mapping that was spoken about right now becomes very important. I was once, and in fact this reminded me of a time that I had gone to JCB's office, and they have fitted their earth movers with the same GPS system that you are speaking of, which was battery powered. And they said that if you, and all of these machines, and there were several 100,000 machines, were mapped on a massive graph in their control room. And they said that from the concentration of these bips, we can see how many, where in India are the earth movers doing construction work. And I said that if we overlay this with a climate risk map, we can easily see if your construction is happening in a high-risk area, which endangers your infrastructure, irrespective of what it is. This is the kind of digitalization and overlapping that we need, the real kind of big data crunching that we need to get information that informs our policy decisions. Anything less than that is a company playing with its own data, which has its place, but change at scale, impact at scale, when we say, will not happen. So I come to the questions that I want to leave you with related to digital transformation. The power of data has to help us make decisions. That's obvious. The power of digitalization in the truest sense that is being spoken of over here has to power leapfrogs. It cannot be a linear transition from X to Y to Z. Then we would get there by ourselves. We do not need the machines to help us. So how do we really get the intelligence out of our systems? Third, we need to define. And this is important because the definitions are where our taxonomy is, our standards are. And that's where the multilateral play is. That's where the geostrategy is. Because how we define something, how we classify it, either it's infrastructure, is it a critical good, is it something of a particular type of HSN code, all of these things define the movement of our goods, our energy sources, our utilities, our people across the globe. So here it becomes important to understand jurisdictions. So digitalization has a huge problem of jurisdiction because we have all seen the struggle with controlling who is in charge of the data. We keep coming up, we try having this problem, that problem, but the truth of the matter is whoever controls the database controls you. They don't control your data, they control you, they control your country, they control your security. So it has to be very, very seriously understood, the implications of digitalization without having the safeguards in place. And that brings me to the technology supremacy. Who controls these digital systems? We saw during COVID, and I bring this up because we think that medical technology is not digital. For a year and a half, we had only 2 US vaccines in play, except Covishield. We had Moderna and Pfizer. They had a blank sheet which said that we are not responsible for any liability that happens to anybody who takes these vaccines. That puts 1.4 billion Indians in jeopardy. And our government was right to not sign on the dotted line, but many countries that did not have the capacity to develop their own vaccines had to sign their dotted line, had to endanger the people. And even after we developed Covaxin, we did not get the EULA from WHO for many, many, many months, making it impossible for our people to travel outside India, putting geopolitical pressure on our country to accept foreign technology. I can say the same thing about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, where within moments, the SWIFT system of banking was broken. The reserve banks held in Switzerland swapped a country's money. We took the Amadeus system of flight regulation out of Russia. If something can be done to Russia, it can be done to us. It is a failure of multilateral systems safeguarding what we call global common technology. We have to play for all of these things. We have to account for all of these things if we are going to play in the global markets. And then I want to speak finally of something we have spoken about throughout the day, knowledge management. Our public data systems are not robust. We have very little information coming out of our government. We have to rely on hearsay and media. Now we have done a lot of things to put a lot of public databases online. We must do this on war footing. The public have a right to public information, but the public also must be given what we call our APIs to interact with that information and build the tools of tomorrow. And then we need, another important point that was made here, executive education, continued education. We keep talking of the demographic dividend and our youth. That's between 22 to 30 years old. What about the people who are above 30? They too need to be considered as part of our demographic and our dividends. So they have to be continuously skilled, and yet we have very few programs that push for continued. And just now we spoke of the resistance to adopting digital systems. Why is that? Because of a lack of awareness, a lack of understanding of the ROI that will come in from the investment of that effort and money. We must understand how to make our systems interoperable and harmonize with the global systems. That means enhancing our own standards, defining them, abiding by them, and interoperating, harmonizing, but not complying. Compliance to another system means that if they change their standards, you have to change everything that you have built till date. And this is a huge vulnerability in systems, especially digitalized systems. And finally comes the point of narratives. Digitalization gives us a very, very strong power to build our own narratives, tell our own story, tell the India story, share best practices, share knowledge, leverage our diaspora. There are many, many things that we can do. We are getting up there. It's been only a couple of years, but Indians learn quickly, and I hope that this is going to be, in the next 25 years, an actual tool in our toolbox to take the India story global. And finally, I would close with that. Digitalization, like any other technology, is a strategic tool. It is not the end-all, it's not the be-all, it's not the start-all. We need to ask ourselves, what is the cost of inaction? But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, what is the cost of action if we only react out of the fear of missing out? Thank you very much for your time.